Hello everyone, Christina Werner here. Welcome to another video for SimonsStamp.com. Today I'm introducing the Warm and Cozy Wishes stamp set from Newton's Nook for Stamptember. This is a Stamptember collaboration set, so if you love it, now is the time to grab it because once it's sold out, it's never coming back. I fell in love with these cute images with the dog and the cat possibly sitting on the couch and decided to create a watercolored scene. Starting out with some Fabriano Artistico Extra White watercolor paper, and I'm stamping the images I plan to use in VersaFine Onyx Black ink. I've chosen this very black ink in particular because it is waterproof. It's great for watercoloring images because it won't smear or smudge or bleed when you start painting. So I ended up stamping the images a few times in order to get really black lines. And then for this blanket, which is meant to drape over the corner of the sofa or the couch, I thought, you know what, I'm going to cut it out and glue it on top, but I do want the little fringe hanging down at the bottom. So I'm just stamping the fringe itself right over the couch itself, just so the fringe is there on the final, assembly of the card. For my painting, I'm using the Art Philosophy watercolor confection set from Prima. And this is a really great watercolor set. It's a new one to me that I've only used a few times, but I thought it would be perfect for painting this scene. I'm going to be using a water brush today. This is an aqua brush, and I'm not going to be putting water in the barrel of the brush. Instead, I'm picking up water out of a cup. So I'm going to start painting, and essentially what I'm doing for each one of these images is I'm doing a flat wash of color. I just want a flat amount of color on the bottom layer, and then I'm going to go back over each one of these and add some shading. So for the couch, I thought it would be fun to make it almost look like a really old vintage green corduroy couch. So you're going to see me paint that in a little bit, and I'll be adding some details to it that make it look like corduroy. I also decided to give the legs a brown color so that it looks like wood. And I also did that very long panel at the bottom as wood itself. It could go either way. It could be the color of the couch, or it also could be wood. I used to have a couch that had a wood runner across the bottom, and I always loved that look. So I decided to add a little bit of wood there. As far as the animals go, I started out by putting a light layer of brown on the dog and a light layer of gray on the cat. And then I brought in just a little bit of pink for blush on their cheeks. In the end, the pink doesn't show much after I add all the shading, but the intent was there. For this pillow up here, I decided to make it super colorful and kind of funky since that's the vibe of this couch with the blanket. And I put a red heart and purple around the outside edge. It reminds me of the TV show Friends for some reason. I think maybe because there was that gold picture frame on the purple door in Monica and Rachel's apartment. If any of you are familiar with Friends, you probably know exactly what I'm thinking of. But the whole vibe of this sort of gave me a 90s Friends vibe. So I added some darker green on the couch, and the way I mixed this darker green shade was I took the original green color that I used, but I added just a tiny bit of a red shade to it. Red and green, when mixed together, create brown. So when you add a little bit of brown to a green, it starts to darken it and neutralize it, and eventually it would turn to brown. So this is a great way to get kind of like a darker shading on this green couch. I added that darker green shade to the buttons and also the seat cushions, and just added a little shading all around. I added a few more other areas where there would be darker spots and kind of blended things out. I also softened the harsh lines on the darker green around the buttons just to make it blend a little bit more with the rest of the couch. So now I'm going to start adding some of the details to the couch to make it look like corduroy. So I needed to dry that entire image so that I could add the detail on top. I first made an even darker green. I added those to the buttons, and then I started to come in and with a very light hand so that it kept the line very thin, I started adding all of these strokes. And as I bring these lines down across the seat cushion, I angle them so they match the couch cushion in perspective. I watered that out so it was a little bit lighter and then continued to add all of these lines onto the couch. I kept most of them all vertical after I did the top of the cushions. And as I add them around these buttons, I let them curve a little bit so it looks like they kind of go into the buttons themselves. Just adding these lines really finishes off that couch. I then brought in a little bit of a darker brown for the dog, and I'm going to be adding shading to the dog and the blanket and also to the cat. Now, when I was painting this dog and this cat, I was thinking of my friend Jennifer McGuire. She has 2 dogs that look a little bit like this puppy here, and they are brown and sort of this color. And then I have 2 cats that are both gray that look alike. So I thought, you know what? This could be me and Jennifer's pets together. So I decided to paint them exactly like that. So in the finished scene, it will be either Jennifer's Foxy or Abaco. Those are her 2 dogs. And then the cats will be either Sophie or Daphne. Those are my cats. I thought that was just kind of really fun. I'm adding some line detail on the cat so it looks like a tabby cat. I love to paint cats really simply like that with a little bit of stripes. For the blanket, I added a slightly darker blue on some of those triangles or the diamonds, I should say. And then I brought in a darker blue to add the shading. As far as that small square pillow, I decided to change the color that was on the interior, and I just added a little bit of an orange shade over top of the yellow, and that just gives it almost a coral shade. I added even more shadow to the dog because it was reading a little bit too pale, and so I brought in more of that dark brown. And I'm going to spend a little bit of time really blending that in and bringing a clean brush over to soften out that edge so that it starts to look a little bit more cohesive. I spent quite a bit of time shading the dog since I really wanted the dog to look great. In the end, I brought over just a clean brush and kind of went over the entire dog, and that softened any of those harsh lines, and then it was more to my liking. Added a little bit more shadow over to the cat as well. On the face, it needed a little bit more shading right around the top by her ears. Almost done here. I'm just going to add some dots for a little bit of detail on that small square pillow. And then I'm going to cut out all of these images. Now I'm cutting all the way up against that black line, which is a little bit tedious. We like to call this fussy cutting, but I think it looks absolutely amazing when you put everything together. For the blanket, I cut off the fringe because remember, that fringe is stamped on the couch. So when I adhere the blanket to the couch, the fringe will already be there. I then took a black brush tip marker and I painted the white edges of each of these images. And what that does is it disguises any of the white gaps. So if you don't get a perfect cut around the image, it's not a huge deal. You're just adding the black around and then it looks much more finished. After I painted the black edges on all these images, it was time to start putting things together. So I grabbed the blanket and I used a little bit of liquid glue right on the back. This is some Gina K Connect glue in one of Gina K's smaller bottles. And I just added that liquid glue all along the back of the blanket and then very carefully lined it up right over the corner of that couch and lined it up with what was previously stamped so that that fringe would be showing. So after the couch was all put together, I added some foam adhesive on the back of the dog and I used my tweezers to hover the dog over the couch and get it in just the right spot before pressing down and adhering the dog to the couch. And then I'm going to take the little pillow and I'll be putting that right there next to the dog. And then I'm going to have the cat down below and it's going to look like it's on the ground in front of the couch. So I'm lining up the bottom of the cat's feet with the bottom of the couch legs. I thought this would be a really fun image on a circle card. It just nestled in right there. So I grabbed my Nested Circles, the die set from Simon, and I first created a circle card base by folding my cardstock and then having the die hang off the edge where the fold is. Then I ran that through my die cutting machine and I'm left with a circle card base. And that image is going to go right there in the center. For a little bit of detail, I grabbed the corrugated embossing folder from Spellbinders, and I cut a second circle out of more white cardstock, and I spritzed that with water on both sides of the cardstock to soften it up. That just makes it so it doesn't crack or tear when I emboss it. I then grabbed my greeting. I'm going to be using the greeting Sofa So Good, kind of like So Far So Good. And I'm going to cut this corrugated circle so that it will leave the bottom portion of my card base completely flat so that I can stamp my greeting on it. So I used a ruler and a craft knife to cut that off. And the cardstock was still a little bit damp, so I used my heat tool to finish drying it completely. I then used some tape runner adhesive. This is Tombow Extreme Adhesive. And I adhered the corrugated embossed piece to the top portion of my card base. By the way, this circle it's a little bit smaller than 4 1/4, so it will fit in a standard A2 envelope. So now I'm going to do my stamping. I'm placing that couch just down long enough so I can get it positioned just right. And then I'll be stamping the Sofa So Good in that same VersaFine Onyx Black ink that I used on the images. I really love how this Sofa So Good sort of nestles into the scene right next to the cat. Now, when I stamped this, I didn't get a super solid image, so I took a black marker and just filled in any of the white that was left behind. That's another great trick to just clean up a greeting or anything that's supposed to be solid black. I then put some foam adhesive on the back of the couch and place that down directly onto my card. And you can see that textured background that sort of looks like a wall and all of our critters right in front on that fun, funky couch. So that's the card for today. Just a reminder that this stamp set will not be restocked if it sells out. So if you love these cute critters on the couch, make sure you pick up the stamp set right away. Thanks for watching, and I will catch you in another video very soon.